And good day, everybody. Welcome to How to Make Your Organization More Productive and Innovative. I'm Dr. Charles Chaffin. My work spans a couple of different fields within psychology. I work in the financial psychology area, and I see there are a number of folks from the financial service firms that are represented here today, working on ways that advisors can engage clients in more meaningful ways, and thinking about decision making when it comes to everything related to investing and retirement plans and whatnot, and then focus on a lot of elements related to attention and productivity, which is kind of the focus of uh, our chat here today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully y'all can see that. And let's see here. All right. So when we think about this idea of being more productive and innovative, this idea of distraction is kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like the idea, the old analogy of like boiling a frog. If you put a frog in water, very hot water, it'll jump out, right? But if you slowly increase the temperature, the frog won't notice it. And although that's a kind of a morbid analogy, there is something to that when it comes to our elements of distraction. We've become less and less productive, even with this kind of whole paradox of having more information, more ability to communicate and whatnot. So I'm working on a book right now focusing on the attention economy, which is basically this element of scarcity of our attention. Our brains haven't changed in 100,000 years, but there's more and more information coming at us. And this idea of knowledge being power really is a bit overrated when you think about it now. It's not just about having knowledge, but it's knowing the right sources to gain the right knowledge and making decisions relative to that. So let's begin this. So I just like you to think about this you can look at it from yourself or your organization or your department, but think about the level of productivity and innovation that's occurring within that. That you can think about yourself or think about the organization and give it a number between 1 and 10, with 10 being, incredibly just, productive, thinking of new ideas and whatnot, and one being we're just not. We're struggling meeting goals, or maybe we don't even have goals that are really, really clear for everybody, and it's taking a lot longer. So just think about that number for a second. And we're going to come back to that. I'm not going to ask you to share that, although you can when we do some Q&A. But we're going to come back to that in just a second. So this idea of thinking about your organization, here we go. So the cost of distraction is actually much higher than one would think. 60% of our actual work time is spent productively. The other 40% is some element of distraction. And we'll talk further about that in a second, but it could be an internal distraction or an external distraction. And that's a lot of time. It's a lot of resources being wasted. And when we are interrupted, it takes us 27% more time to complete a task than it would otherwise. We have something called resumption cost, which I'll get to in a second. But the lexicon of life really is this element of interruption and wasted attention. Thinking about our relationship with our phones, and we're scrolling constantly, whether we're in line at a store or we're sitting at our desk or working from home or wherever it might be. We just kind of go down these attentional rabbit holes all the time. And it adds up. Think about the time that you spend maybe working out or cutting the grass or whatever it might be, and you stop to check your phone every once in a while. And suddenly, instead of it taking 45 minutes, it takes an hour and 15 minutes to complete that task because you're checking your phone and whatnot. And that has an impact on your decision making to work out subsequently, because you're thinking, well, it's going to take me an hour and 15 minutes to work out. Well, I don't have time for that. When in reality, it should only take you 45 minutes. And that can really snowball and add up as part of our lives in general. So when we think about this idea for employees, we look at it from an individual perspective. And Prolific, the program that is an on-demand program, and there's custom programs and live programs for it too, but is really designed for both sides. It's designed for the individual employee to think about ways to be more productive and creative, and also for the organization to say, we're wasting a lot of resources and we need to get folks back on track. So, but on the individual side, distraction can be a huge career derailer. It doubles the risk of making errors. Think about the idea of you're reading something and somebody comes in and interrupts you. and then you're trying to get back to where you were. You thought, okay, where was I again? What was I doing? Where was I at in the text? What was I thinking about? And that can add up over the course of even a 30-minute period. It adds time to our projects. And what we see is on average, it takes 23 minutes for us to get back to a full level of focus of where we were before we were interrupted. So we're focused, we're what we call a state of flow. All of our attentional resources are on a task and we're problem solving, maybe we're writing and whatnot. And then we get that interruption. We could lose up to 23 minutes and that can certainly add up. There's also an element of what you say, an internal distraction of anxiety and this feeling that we're kind of spinning plates cognitively, multiple plates cognitively. It's a kind of this element of, basically I'm just feeling overwhelmed and I'm actually tired because I'm multitasking. And we know that multitasking can not only be tiring for us, but it can also cause us to make a lot more errors because most people think they're great multitaskers, but they're not. Only about 3% of the population is actually good at doing two things at once. And distraction derails innovation because, as we all know, when we take this element of innovation, it requires us to really look at a problem from multiple perspectives and really think about it in a very deep and meaningful way. It could be everything from listening to what customers and stakeholders and clients are thinking about something to thinking about the evolution of the project and thinking about what the team is doing relative to that. Well, if you're constantly distracted, you're not really getting that deep thought to really be innovative. I'll pause. If anybody wants to chime in and has a question or a comment, feel free. It's much more interesting if others are talking because I'll start to bore myself after a while. You don't have to raise your hand, just jump in. For corporations, distraction is expensive. So distraction is actually 15 times more expensive than sick leave for an organization. And it, missed opportunities and creativity and a loss of new initiatives. But again, going back to that first stat, if we're only engaged for 60% of our time, that means the workforce is working Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And the rest of that time is distracted. So we're not as productive. We're losing opportunities to be innovative. And there's this element too of employee motivation and retention, because we know that when we're thinking about people being intrinsically motivated, meaning they're doing something for the sake of wanting to do it, and they have a goal that's set, if they're kind of wandering and meandering throughout that, the likelihood of them achieving that goal goes way, way down. So retention and motivation and retention rather they are significantly connected, and distraction has a big part of that. So I like just the picture of the ankle weights here. These are not my ankles, but it really does. They're kind of the ankle weights of an organization, of an individual, this element of distraction, because we have a limited amount of cognitive resources. And if we're spending some of that time on our phones or or an email, which we'll get to in a little bit, or meetings that aren't necessarily productive, that's weighing us down. And that's really wasting our most valuable resource. Attention is our most valuable resource. It's the gateway to everything that we experience. And living in an attention economy, when it comes to resources, whether it's money, whether it's love, whether it's anything, none of that can be achieved unless we get attention first. And if we're distracted as an individual or as an organization, then we are really, really hampered. So I'm going to open this up as we go through these self-assessment questions. And so let's walk through and then maybe we could have a little chat about it. So think about these kind of 6 areas. First of all, do you feel like you or your employees or clients, are you drowning yourselves in email? And look at that from a couple of different perspectives. Yeah, people over copy and people over email, and emails are too long. But think about your email inbox. Think about how many times you read an email when you received it, and then you go back and revisit it later to respond to it. Now you've read it twice. Maybe before you even respond to find it again, maybe you can't find it. Now you're wasting even more time and attention on it. So when I say drowning, think about it from an individual perspective, but also thinking about, emails being fired off and whatnot. Number 2, how many communication platforms are you using? Are you using, some IM platforms, that's tied to email or whatnot? Are you finding that there's some redundancies there that, people, one of the best questions, did you get my email? Right? We love that question. But do you feel like that, there's some redundancies there and wasted time when it comes to communication platforms, particularly internally? Number three, do large internal meetings sometimes lose focus on quarterly or annual goals? Do you sit in meetings and wonder, okay, why am I here? Why are those people here? What is the focus here? And what kind of decisions need to be made? Number four, are there issues with office and civility? I'm not going to ask you to obviously comment on your specific organization, but we're going to talk about incivility and how that's connected to distraction as well. Five, do your employees struggle with open office noise or other distractions? And six, do your employees use good judgment with regard to when to use email or Zoom or phone? So we have data on that when it comes to, particularly in our psychology of financial planning work, that shows the connection between even a short video conference being far more effective than sending an email. It's actually 34 times more effective to have a Zoom conversation via video, even for 10 minutes, than to send another email. So I'm going to pause for a second because I've been talking for quite a bit. Any of these kind of jump out at you? You don't have to, name your organization or anything like that, but are any of these questions kind of resonate with you? Or you can't have me talking the whole time, you'll fall asleep. Someone else has to say something.
So thanks for having me. My name's Rich. I'm with Odom. One of the, I think, 2 is probably one of the biggest pain in the necks that we have with the communication platforms. It's really difficult to nail down one because a lot of the external stakeholders tend to prefer to use one to rather than another. So, and it could be for reasons of security and so forth. But one thing I didn't see on here is more of the social media platforms when it comes on the marketing end, because there's so many different places that you want to attract new users and so forth. So I know there's some tools out there, but again, it's really like an internal, external stakeholder discussions, which tends to be can be have a lot of conflict in that, but it does take a lot of our time, our productivity time away from some of the main goals of our company.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thanks for that, Rich. The internal piece is a little bit easier to manage when it comes to the communication, but like you said, the external is tougher. When I work with organizations on that, it's a lot harder because you're really working with the confines of what a client's asking for, and that's a little bit tougher. One group that I worked with, it was just a matter of, they had 4 different clients that were communicating in a lot of different ways. There were some international clients and whatnot. And so what they found was, when we did an analysis of this, they were using all the different platforms for all the different clients as kind of a catch-all. And what we said was, well, let's just identify the platform by which that client wants to work, and let's document it and make sure the rest of the team knows it, so that there isn't this redundancy. But so you could do that, but outside of that, it's a little tougher as far as when it comes to the external folks. Steve wrote where to start. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think number 2 really rings home with me in regards to all these new softwares keep coming out, new ways of doing things, new web-based this, new that, and some of them are trying to build in messaging, and it works to some degree, but then you got to use outside resources and they don't necessarily have access. So you're trying to manage and coordinate all of this, and tons of redundancy I'm seeing because of trying to implement all these new, better ways of doing things. And there are a lot of improvements with doing things, but I see the communication aspect of all the different softwares ends up slowing you. It ends up turning around and ruining every gain you made. You lose all the gains you made from the other things by having to try and communicate 3 different ways, or you got 3 different notification systems that, hey, you've got a new task, or you've got a message, or you've got a this, and then you get that in email, and then you get it in a bell, and then by the time you go through it, I've had to answer the same thing 4 ways. So yeah, that's kind of what I meant by where to start, because it's all over the place.
Yeah, it's a great comment. It's so true. And it's part of the reason, like in order to address that, and we hear this all the time, it really does start at the senior level within the organization. Okay, how are we going to communicate going forward? And even thinking about email, it's just a great example. If you have, let's say you have 10 people reporting to you within your department, have you talked about your style and strategy when it comes to email? I mean, think about the amount of time that will help in just saying, look, I don't need elaborate email. We're going to do updates face to face relative to this. So I don't need this. I would prefer this and this. That can save a ton of time just in terms of everybody being on the same page as far as how we're going to communicate internally. I'll get to meetings, in-person meetings internally in a second, which is a big part of that. But part of that just comes from saying, this is what we're going to use. And just because this has a chat feature, we're not going to use it. We're going to disable it. And we're going to focus on, A, B, and C, and prefer that if you could do a 5-minute, Zoom call with somebody working from home internally, that's much better than doing an email back and forth. So thanks for that comment, Steve.
Sure.
Anybody else?
Charles, there's like one. It'd be great if I don't know if there's actual tools out there that does it. I know pushing out like posts, there's tools that you can post in different social platforms, but is there anything that can be used to take in all the different communication platforms under one, even with maybe even your email as well, into one portal that you can, you can reply to your emails or your communication?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the case when it comes to some of the, every one of the big companies has some sort of communication or chat software, and they purposely kind of are siloed. I would assume that that's the case with some, but I'm not really aware of that. When this comes up in my experience with consulting with groups, I basically just say, let's decide what we're going to use and use one and one only. But
Okay,
that's a great question.
yeah, so that makes it like, that might be my number 7th business I'll start.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not, right?
Right.
Lane's surrounded by colleagues, so he can't show you his in the chat, but internal committees, planning, financial planning, investment, marketing, yeah, and it's difficult to keep all the committees focused. And we're going to talk a little bit more. Thank you for that, Lane. We're going to talk about that as we go on. Thanks everybody for your contributions there, and keep it coming. So let's dive into kind of some derailers. So we can really look at everything relative to an internal distraction or an external distraction, and we'll dive into what those specifically are in a second. Communication we've kind of already talked about, and multitasking, and a lack of clarity when it comes to goals. So when we talk about external distractions, this tends to be what people think about when they think about distractions. So it's an interruption. It could be a visual interruption. It could be an auditory interruption. It could be fragrance related. We had that once with an open office play. The biggest issues were related to colognes and perfumes of other coworkers. But it's some element of it's something sensory related that's distracting an individual. It's a open office noise, a coworker, email coming in, and email, especially when, and I'll talk about this in a second, that you have the Outlook inbox open and you get that push notification, and really any push notification from social media or something else that's causing you to direct your attention towards that and not on what you're doing. So we know that it's losing focus on our projects and work. It's an issue during meetings. And again, it less time for really reflection and deeper thought about complex topics that are relative to it's either develop your annual goals or quarterly goals, or developing new quarterly or annual goals. So this idea of resumption cost we talk about. So it's not just a matter of when we distract somebody, and they're distracted for the amount of time that that noise, for example, took place. It's also that resumption cost. That's the time where you go, okay, where was I again? What was I doing? And if you've got two people that are distracted in a meeting or multiple people, then all that total of resumption costs add up, right? So getting back on track is remembering where you were, finding your place, and then backing up to where you built up in your working memory. Our working memory is basically our mental workbench of things that we're thinking about right now in order to do a task. So when people talk about especially an external distraction, they always think about it in terms of, that moment that sound happened and whatnot. But it's not. It's also the time it takes us to get back up to speed cognitively. We don't talk about internal distractions enough, but internal distractions are related to vigilance. So that could be privacy relative to an open office space, or certainly emails a big part of that, or internal chatter. So privacy can be something from the standpoint of somebody's in an open office space and they're spending time focused on not being distracted. So they could be, focused on their headphones, and they're really kind of trying to be in this space, creating this kind of shell where they're not distracted. But in reality, they're using resources to basically distract themselves from being distracted, if that makes sense. The most popular is email. So, we're thinking about an email or text that we might have coming in, and we're kind of monitoring that. We have our inbox open, or we have our phone open, we're waiting on a text from somebody, and we're devoting resources to that, even though there's nothing there. And vigilance is really, really taxing for us. So when you fly, you go through TSA pre-check, which is what it's called in the States, and I know we have friends from around the world on here. But any type of monitoring that's done at an airport of bags or whatnot is incredibly taxing. Vigilance is taxing, even if we're looking at a monitor. And so you may notice that when you go through security, they're constantly rotating individuals. And the reason for that is because vigilance is really, really cognitively expensive for us. So if you have your email inbox open and you're thinking about an email or whatnot, that's really, really distracting you. Now, this idea of internal chatter or mind wandering is also really, really powerful. So stress, worry, and anxiety can be an internal distraction for us. Um, the idea of a wandering mind, our minds tend to wander about 49% of the time. And for the most part, when our minds wander, it tends to go towards negative things. And that obviously is going to be distraction for our work. Incivility, office incivility is certainly an issue when it comes to the environment of an organization. But what people don't talk about enough is the idea of if there's behavior that's happening between two coworkers that's rude or whatnot. It's not just the issue of, the recipient of that behavior, but it's also anybody that witnessed that. So if you have three people that maybe read a rude email, that were on an email chain and it was rude between employees, there's a huge distracting factor when it comes to everybody on that, because they're now ruminating and thinking about that. And it's something that organizations don't really think about enough. That you want to have a good organizational environment, but incivility is incredibly expensive cognitively when it comes to organization. And a great example of that is thinking about if you're driving to work and somebody cuts you off and you have a terrible experience driving to work, it goes with you. You would be thinking about it for a while, even when you start your day. That's a great example of that. So it's more severe and immediate than we realize, and it could be low intensity negative behavior. So it's rudeness or disrespect or even dismissiveness. Email, some of the things we do is we'll go in and kind of talk to senior leadership, and sometimes they'll say, what, we want you to talk to the employees. And so we'll do some interviews and some surveys, and email always comes up as kind of one of those target areas where, everything's fine, but they send these emails that are, really, really passive aggressive or really dismissive or whatnot. And again, that's really, really expensive. And obviously it creates low job satisfaction and commitment, but we ruminate on those things. It reduces our creativity and mistakes and whatnot. I want to pause again. I like to pause. I think I'm a dull speaker, so I want to hear somebody else. Any thoughts on on this idea of incivility or even internal distractions in general. Feel free to jump in. You don't have to name coworkers that are, you know, you don't have to name names. No? All right, we'll keep going. If something pops into your mind, please jump in. So everybody wants to talk about email and meetings. So we spend about 28% of our workday reading and answering emails. You know, there's not really an average workday, but basically it comes to about 2.5 hours per day. And we check our email 15 times per day, even if we're not necessarily getting a notification. And for all the reasons that we talked about, it becomes expensive. It's expensive for individuals, it's expensive for the organization. And lots of data on, emails sent over weekends, particularly internally. Rich was talking about external clients and whatnot, which is really, really different. But when internally, if you get this culture where you're supervising people and you're sending, emails over the weekend, it's with an understanding that someone's going to respond, right? That there's going to be a response. And now you're creating vigilance over the weekend, which gets into some of the other things that we talked about. Now it's happening on Saturdays and Sundays. And so one of the things that we talk about is, does it really need to be sent? You could program emails to be sent during work hours, which could be really, really helpful. But it is expensive to us for reading and rereading emails and whatnot as we check it constantly. Oh, I got that email from that person. I'm going to keep it in this inbox. And then you try to find it and it just adds up. And full email inboxes waste a ton of time. We talk about that in Prolific because we're searching for emails from bosses and clients. And we may not even know exactly, okay, I'm going to over communicate with my boss via email because I don't want something to be left out. And again, it goes back to this idea of, what's your email policy within your organization or with individuals that are reporting to, or what's the policy of the person that you're reporting to? And they say, look, I don't need a fancy email. I just need, basic facts, and I don't need you to check in every day when you're working from home and whatnot, because that takes an enormous amount of time and it takes enormous amount of vigilance, because if they send an email to you as the supervisor, they're probably now going to be, there's a high likelihood they're going to be expending resources waiting on an email back. And so now it just doubles the cost when it comes to email. So thinking about you and your team's email style, talk about it. How many times are you reading an email before you respond to it? And you should really think about that, right? Yeah, I do. And I'm guilty of that too. Sometimes I will, have something come in. Oh, I got this email from this person. And then I may think about what I'm going to send. And then I go back to it. I try to find it, as opposed to putting it in a separate folder. This is what I need to respond to. And it's not in this big bloated inbox, which could be a challenge. Scheduling email time is ideal. And to block out time that you're going to be focused on email. Put it in your calendar that, in the morning, if you have a heavy focus that you need mornings and afternoons because you get a lot of emails, then block them out. That's the time you're going to focus on it. And then the other parts, just not be engaged with it. That requires communication. You can't just do that. You're working with other people. So talking about it could be really, really helpful. I know we have a lot of people that are executives on this call. There's a really great study out of Michigan State that looked at email and executive. And what they found was that individuals that are in leadership positions that are constantly checking email, they tend to go from the strategic and the innovative into the weeds in the times after they're in their email inbox. So you're there kind of in the weeds looking at your email, and now your mindset is still there as opposed to thinking big picture and whatnot. So the stakes are even higher for executives when it comes to blocking out time and thinking strategically. Everybody loves to talk about email, so I'll pause there. Any thoughts on that? Are you all sending emails right now? Is that what's happening?
Hi, Charles, it's Johanna. I'm here with Rich.
Hi.
Hi, I have a comment / question. So I'm actually very good about managing my email like physically. So I keep a lot of folders. And I only keep things in the inbox that haven't been tended to. And I actually work for somebody in one of my careers who he makes it a practice to clean his inbox out every single day. And when he doesn't, he said he'll go to sleep and he'll dream about whatever email is left.
Yeah.
So I kind of admire that, but at the same time, there are some things that require thought that you can't write an email in 5 minutes. So I've heard the theory of like, if you can do it within 3 minutes, don't put it on a to-do list, just do it. Or, you know, if it takes longer. And anyway, so I'm just trying to understand. I love what you're saying about blocking off time for email. I think I don't do that well, but I'm wondering if you have any tips for, I've probably got about 100 emails in my collective email boxes right now that are in my inbox, and most of them require some bigger lift, which is why I leave them there. So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it is, this idea, well, if it only takes a couple of minutes, go ahead and do it. But going back to what we're thinking about relative to distraction, it may not just be a couple of minutes. It might, people that tend to say that tend to have their email inbox open all the time. I'm going to quickly just do this. Well, now they're already distracted, right? So they've distracted themselves from what they were doing to go and do that. And even sending a 3-minute email that you're composing, the resumption costs to get back to where you were, whatever it was you were doing, are going to be really, really hard. I understand, it's kind of an OCD nature to say, look, I want to finish my day with an empty email inbox, but why? I mean, for what? I mean, what exactly is that going to help? Especially when they do, like you said, require more thought. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a I don't think you should have multiple folders, but there could be a folder that's a quick responses, and then something that's going to require something more thoughtful. And having an empty inbox for the sake of having it just doesn't really, I think that could be a challenge, as opposed to, let's say you block off the last half an hour or hour of your work to address email. Well, let's prioritize. Let's look through what's there. Let's not just start from what was just sent, or even what's the oldest. Let's go through and see, even if there's 50 emails, let's see what in here is a priority for me to address today. What do I need to get done, and what can wait until tomorrow? And then I put that in the folder and I come back. So I think there's some real issues with, it's not something that if you have to feel as if it's never going to be something that's going to be done. Email is just not done. It's not a done thing. You're never going to walk away with it being completed. But I think you have to manage it and prioritize it.
And one other thing I have to add is, I think for me, what I struggle with is when the sender of an email has to write a long story to ask one question. Is there a way? I mean, I've been told, like, just read the last paragraph or the last couple.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially if you know the person, you may find that you could have that little trick. I think especially externally, but even internally, since COVID, one of the things that's been a great opportunity for us when it comes to our work is the ease by which people are able to communicate via video. And, we still have a lot of organizations, though, that think about, okay, if I'm going to do a Zoom call, it needs to be at least 30 minutes or it needs to be an hour. And I need to set that up, as opposed to, what, I see this long email that's 2 or 3 paragraphs long. Let's just do a 15-minute call and talk about it. In the financial services area, I talk to firms all the time about any excuse I can to get somebody on a Zoom call for 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to do it because I can read their body language. And I can have that conversation, and I can be far more compelling. The data suggests 34 times more compelling in a face-to-face, whether it's video or in person, than on email. So I'm gonna, I need to be careful about managing my time, of course. But if I see a long email like that, let's set up a time to talk. Let's just take 10 minutes and have a conversation, and then it's done. Because as Rich, you got that 4-paragraph email that you're talking about, and you respond, you might have 4 more paragraphs coming back at you in another email, right? And so having that face-to-face, if I can find that excuse to have the face-to-face, I'm going to do it.
Sometimes I miss the old school way where we just pick up the phone and have a quick, like, 2-minute chat and
Yeah.
get to it. And, but sometimes I think people just hide behind, their email.
Yeah,
And
They
exactly.
do.
And email and text and digital communication, I think it can be even come like a little bit like road rage. Like you can say anything you want because you're buffered by this digital medium and it's flattened. And I agree with Rich. I think we had a client years ago that we got into some little thing with his IT people about, and the manager was like, make sure you don't engage in email with them, pick up the phone and call them, because like you said about body language, I think that's the kind of hard thing about COVID was in-person meetings are so amazing when you can meet somebody in the flesh. I mean, the next best thing is video, the next best thing is phone. And to me, the stacking order is then text, and then email's kind of the worst if you're trying to say something really meaningful.
it doesn't pick up your emotions,
Right.
yeah.
And it leaves lots of room for misinterpretation. depending on
Absolutely.
The mood of the
Abs-
person who gets it and what they're dealing with aside from that and so forth.
Absolutely. And, we hear that all the time. It comes up in our consulting work with organizations. The email will come up, and we're going to get to meetings in a second. And there really is no opportunity to really engage in a meaningful way. They send these emails, things are missed, there's misinterpretation. And think about the amount of time that it wastes. And, I've had leaders of organizations say to me, well, Dr. Chaffin, that sounds great, but, we don't have the resources to spend a half an hour on a Zoom call as opposed to, emails. And we pulled up some of the emails. You have 8 people on an email chain and everybody's responding. And we went through the whole thing. I said, how much time do you think this is taking your employees, all 8 of them, to reread them, focus on it, think about it and whatnot? It's actually longer than a half an hour and you're getting less done. And you brought up phone. I want to mention one thing about the phone. Some people, there's this element what we call self-presentation theory, and that is, okay, how do I look? Plastic surgery went up 90% the year after COVID because people were, worried about how they look on Zoom calls and whatnot. And so there's a really great opportunity for, especially if you have, it's not so much with clients, although you can ask clients, but certainly internally, hey, you know what? I prefer us just to talk on the phone. Let's just have a call. Let's just do a 10-minute call, or you talked about a 2-minute call. Let's just do that. And some people feel more relaxed. They don't have to worry about how they look. Maybe they're working from home and it's the beginning of the day, and you're getting much more meaningful dialogue with them. So I agree with you on the phone. My only probably friendly amendment to that is sometimes phone's the best way to go with some individuals that you're working with. So great comment.
Yeah, and that multiple email thread with 8 people on it is like, it makes me feel like we should call it the rabbit hole email. Because what happens,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Let's continue on. We're doing great on time, great dialogue. So let's talk about meetings for a second. So meetings are expensive. Organizations don't realize how expensive they are. Now, I just talked about how great they are, but they're expensive from the perspective of, let's invite everybody to the meeting and let's just chime in. You got 12 executives sitting around the room. You're paying salary to all those people, and you just scheduled a 2-hour meeting. You're going to block out. That's a lot of money. And so when you have unfocused meetings, it really is wasting time. There's too many people involved. And what are we doing here? What are we trying to accomplish? And so when we think about this idea of having meetings more effective, there's just a list of things. I don't give them all here. A lot of them are part of Prolific and whatnot, but agendas are ideal. And an agenda ahead of time is even better. Make sure people have it ahead of time and make sure it's worth them looking at. We all fall victim to, bullet point agendas that might have, 15 words, which, provide some sort of structure, but is it really going to help? Instead, line up your agenda to what your goals are within the department or the organization for the year and put those in the agenda. This is what this is about. And, I find with groups, sometimes they'll say, well, what if it doesn't apply? Well, then maybe you shouldn't have the meeting then. I mean, if you can't tie the meeting to your goals, then one or the other needs to change. Either you don't have the meeting or you need to refine your goals. You need to revise them for the year. Posing questions that need to be answered in the meeting is really, really helpful. So instead of saying, okay, we're going to talk about the annual conference. Okay, now what the heck does that mean? Where's it going to be? Are we gonna serve drinks in the afternoon? But instead, okay, what's our theme going to be? And we need to walk out of this meeting with who the keynote speakers are going to be. And if you give folks that ahead of time, like a week ahead of time, now they got time to think about it. Okay, we got to come up with some ideas. Everybody bring 2 ideas for a keynote speaker. Everybody think about the theme and whatnot. And that can be really, really helpful. There's lots of research on length of meetings and whatnot. I like this idea of scarcity is a critical economic principle, but it's really helpful for meetings. For most meetings, particularly internal, but sometimes external too, there's a period in every meeting where especially when the agenda is not tight, kind of like what we're talking about here, that about halfway past or a little past that, people go, oh my goodness, we're over halfway through and we haven't gotten this accomplished yet. And then there's a higher level of focus. Sometimes that's whoever's leading the meeting says, okay, we got to get this done, and they hit gas. Well, I think about it, well, instead of hitting the gas at minute 32 of an hour meeting, maybe you only need a half an hour then. There's no point in wasting all of this time. So use scarcity to your advantage. I can get a meeting down to in some cases 20 minutes if it's about picking individuals for keynote speakers, if we're working ahead of time and whatnot. We have people really thinking about it and whatnot. One more thing, or 2 more things, I guess, tied to meetings and emails that I don't have listed here in the slides. Status update meetings are just brutal. They're such a waste of time because in every one of them, and I know people always push back, and that's fine, you can push back on it, but people just take turns talking. Everybody go around the room once a week and share what they're doing. Well, okay, what's the purpose of this? Is it trying to help with collaboration? Do other people need to be involved in that? But status updates for the sake of status updates, most people are cognitively checked out when other people are talking. Or they're thinking about, okay, how am I doing a job better than that person who's making more or less money than I am, right? The status updates don't necessarily work really well, but instead be really, really focused when you're having that time. If you feel like you need to engage somebody that's reporting to you or you're reporting to them more, then schedule that meeting like we talked about individually. But I really try to encourage organizations to be really careful or certainly be creative when it comes to status meetings. For what's the purpose of this? If it's to do more with regard to collaboration, then be explicit about that. Really, really quick about goals and motivation. I spend time on that in Prolific. It's tied so much to distraction and being focused that it's really, really important to include. So, and those of you financial advisors, I know some of you are working with some of your firms, so you've heard this before from me, but clarity on goals. What are the outcomes for this quarter of the year? And how does everybody's role fit into that? It is astounding to me how many organizations I work with that the employees will say, I don't know what my goal is for this year. I don't know what my end goal is going to be, or I don't know what in the world I'm doing fits into what the department or the organization is doing. It happens all the time. And that is a huge retention issue. If people don't feel like they're being valued and that their piece of their work doesn't fit into the larger picture, or they just don't know how it does, it's a major issue. Smart goals, I tie smart goals into Prolific, and we talk about that. Everybody understands the need and the development of that. But I think the goal development process really needs to be collaborative. And so often they tend to come down from high when they happen, and they're put in the lap of the employee, as opposed to, let's tap into that intrinsic motivation. If I could get an employee, and this applies to clients too, advisors, right? If I can get an individual to buy into that goal intrinsically, the likelihood that they're going to achieve it goes way up, because they feel like, if it's a financial goal for a client, then it's about their family or their vacation. It's something really specific. If it's a intrinsic goal for an employee, they feel like it's theirs, their likelihood of achieving is going to be way higher. So you basically get this waterfall as goals come down to support the organizational goals. And there's a really great opportunity to say, okay, for the employee, for the supervisor to say to the employee, here's the goal for the department. I want you to come back next week and let's talk about how your work can fit into that. And they may not hit it. You may have to go back and revise and refine, but it's one of those ideas in education that fast is slow and slow is fast. I might have to take more time on the front end to help them refine that goal, but they're going to own it, and there's a higher likelihood they're going to achieve it. And so it's really helpful to kind of tap into that intrinsic motivation. So we take it's 1:40, it's 47 past. So we look at this idea from prolific. We look at it from a multi perspective, getting from distraction to traction. We talked about all of these in some way, shape, or form, and then we dive into them more specifically, both in the on-demand program as well as in person. We do a distraction checklist. I'm gonna, this kind of walk through kind of both within the office as well as working from home, some of the common distractions. I would just say kind of funny that working from home, one of the studies that just came out, individuals said, yeah, video games and their pets and television were the highest distractors. And I thought to myself, I wonder if the employers were seeing that. Appreciate their honesty there or whatnot. But one of the things you could do is, and we'll take time for some dialogue here, is a distraction checklist. And we start prolific with this. We start all of our programs with this. You take a look around your workspace and you find out what are the potential sources of distraction. You've got your phone, maybe you're working from home, you have pets. Some organizations have pets running around. Maybe it's a pet in the office. Your neighbors, children, video games we talked about. Is it an open office environment that's causing distraction? We had one organization that everybody's desks were facing the freeway, and it was just a huge distraction. People, employees basically, when I talked to them, they're like, "Yeah, we're distracted. We're staring at the cars all day." It was one of the things we actually changed the environment, which really helped. But make a list of those sources of distraction around you, and determine what you can change and what you can't. It's going to help you be more focused in your work. So just as far as next steps, just to wrap up for dialogue, so Prolific is available. I'll send a link out for Prolific. It's a program that's designed for individuals to be more productive and creative. And we walk through a checklist at the very beginning for individuals, and then we actually do a distraction log. Okay, how often were you distracted, and who did it? What were the sources of that? And we do that in our consulting. And well, yeah, I had the same person stop by my office 7 times today. Well, that's expensive. How can you address that and whatnot? So we offer custom, I guess this is the sales portion. We offer custom offerings when it comes to discovering the issues affecting the organization. It's great to come in ahead of time. Senior staff retreats are great. We're doing a lot of those this summer. We basically come in and you talk to people, and then you meet with the senior staff and say, let's talk about our email policy. Let's talk about communication and whatnot. And okay, how are we going to go forward with this and whatnot? So, and then goal setting and workplace analysis, all those things are part of it. So I'll stop there. It's about 50 past the hour. Happy to open up for questions or dialogue.
Charles, going back to the goal settings, agendas, one of the things that typically happens with us, especially even like smaller, like entrepreneur companies are just starting, and they get a funding and they got all this money and they want to, do everything fast so they can get to the market and so forth. But I found that doing too much, thinning yourself out, and changing, sometimes you have to change. Something doesn't work, so your goals change. And that, I think, really goes to the senior level leadership and making sure that we're realistic in our goals, both quarterly and yearly goals. So do you have anything else you can suggest around that end?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's, you tend to have people in startups that are very innovative people, right? I mean, that they tend to be that way. They're entrepreneurs. And there's lots of benefit to that. The challenge with individuals like that is that they tend to want to do a lot of things and they get off of the grid at what the goals are often. And so having specificity on the goals is really, really helpful. for them, kind of guide, again, everything from like the meeting agenda, okay, or, you know, if you're doing quarterly goals, where's the eval relative to that? And the eval of goals, it's not just evaluating employee performance, but it's to the point you just said, maybe this is not working, maybe this metric isn't right, maybe we need to refine it. You know, we're in July right now. Is if there's no chance of meeting the end of your goal, let's
Right.
talk about that, right? So it's a two-way street when it comes to, you know, looking at goals and having to refine them. But I really believe that if it's, you know, if everything that an individual, that an employee is doing needs to be consistent with what the department's goals are. And if you know, and it always happens that somebody, as I mentioned, somebody says, well, we had to do this. Okay, well then get it in your goals. Then get it in your goals and refine them. But everything needs to be, you know, a good leader is basically taking the resources of the organization and applying those to meet the organization's goals. That's what it is. And if you need to change those goals, then you change them. But so many people either, you know, I think for startups, as I said, they kind of go off on tangents and they're not focused,
Yeah.
or you just have rank and file folks that go, what the heck am I doing? I mean, I don't know what my goals are. I know what I do, but well, how am I being evaluated? And again, how does my work fit into the larger picture, which is really, really necessary.
Yeah, and I think also keeping an environment, you know, creating an environment within your whole entire company where they can feel good about coming to leadership and saying, you know, this doesn't make sense. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what the goals are, what the objectives are, and and that would actually help leaderships. But leadership has to be open to that.
They do, and they have to. In a lot of cases, I'm going to stop the